In the meantime, the Supreme Court says it will indeed rule on the legal battle over making the president's tax and financial records public. Its decision could come as soon as this summer. Oral argument slated for March. Former acting U.S. Attorney General Matthew Whitaker with us right now. How do you think this is all going to go? If, for example, the Supreme Court, Matt, were to rule, all right, you have to turn all this over, then what?
Well, I think it's going to be a really interesting case to watch because it's going to see if there are limits to Congress's oversight abilities. We know that Congress, as soon as they get documents and as soon as they would get these tax returns, they would leak them or they would be leaked to the media. And that is a very dangerous situation because, as you know, tax returns are probably one of the most confidential documents that an American submits to their government. You know, medical records are in that same category of things that, you know, we don't want sort of just walking around the street. And so I think this case is going to maybe backfire on the Democrats in the House because it could put limits on their oversight ability. And I think that would be an unintended consequence of some of these lawsuits that they have going on all over the country.
We don't know why. There are a lot of reasons that the president has explained he could not release a lot of this information. This is going back 10 years, so to his point, you do have to wonder whether this is a bit of a witch hunt going on. But having said all of that, the Supreme Court might not rule en masse on the three various groups that want to get their hands on these records. So it's possible, I guess, I've talked to lawyers, you know the subject far better than I, that he could go ahead and rule whatever the Southern District Court wants. You know, they'd be okay with releasing, but what Democrats and various committees want, for example, the Rules Committee and elsewhere, that's another matter. That would be a muddy decision and one that really wouldn't advance the ball, right?
Well, there is no doubt that that a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor especially, that's where my experience is, in a a limited subpoena could obtain tax records. That's a very common procedure, but they would have to obviously make the showing and have meet the legal standards. So Congress's subpoenas and the Attorney General of New York, those are different standards, and so sort of like you said, to put all those cases together is going to be difficult to see exactly where that line is drawn. But I think the biggest issue for me in this whole case is what Congress's power, oversight ability to request that. And you're right, it appears to be a complete fishing expedition to get the tax returns, to not only most likely leak them, but then to just pour through them and try to politically embarrass the president in an election year.
You know, we all remember the case of Watergate, where the Supreme Court ruled 9-0. Then President Richard Nixon had to turn over the tapes shortly thereafter. He resigned. And you know the president fairly well. Do you think it ever came to that, Matt, and the Supreme Court said, by whatever margin, release these records, that he would resign?
No, and I think it's ridiculous to even sort of play these what-if scenarios. This president has led this country not only through these difficult times, but I mean, in unprecedented times. We've had the strongest economy that we've ever had. Unemployment rates among blacks, Latinos, the population generally is the lowest it's ever been. The stock market's strong. You know, places where I go, small business owners have more optimism about their business and their futures than they ever have. So, you know, this president has done more for this country than really any president in our modern history. And so I don't think there is any scenario where he would say this isn't worth it.
I thought I'd catch it a weak moment. It's Saturday morning. You might, but obviously you handle it very definitely.
I've had my coffee.
As acting Attorney General for a while, a lot has been made of the relationship the present Attorney General has with the president. President Obama's former Attorney General, for example, Matt, Eric Holder, blasting the relationship and the remarks that he has had since about the Inspector General's report uncovering these FBI abuses in the Russian probe. Now, having said that, Holder was calling Barr a partisan actor who is, quote, unfit to lead the Justice Department. But you might remember when he said this.
I'm happy. I'm still enjoying what I'm doing. There's still work to be done. I'm still a president's wingman.
If Bill Barr had ever said, I'm the president's wingman, man, oh man, they'd be going into the Justice Department to haul him out. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I read Eric Holder's op-ed, and he sort of says how reluctant he is to criticize attorney generals, but I think he only criticizes Republican attorney generals. He criticized me, he criticized Jeff Sessions, he's criticized Bill Barr, and but he didn't criticize Loretta Lynch when she had the Clinton tarmac meeting. So this is somebody that is clearly a partisan player. He's obviously spending a lot of time trying to flip state legislatures and being quite successful at it in order to affect the 2020 redistricting after the census. And so I think, this is here's a person that whatever he writes, he's just going to attack Republicans. And that's an example. Bill Barr is doing a tremendous job as Attorney General. I know him personally. I have a lot of respect for him. And I think he is leading the department in the right direction. Eric Holder disagrees with it because it is against his, policy and partisan
And that's
concerns.
fine. You don't like the
just the way it
politics
goes.
involved here, or that it's a Republic. I get that. But I mean, I just think you got to be very fair and balanced in your coverage. And I always remind my media colleagues, remember, it was John Kennedy who had his brother, Robert Kennedy,
Right.
as his attorney general and chief confidant. Now, I'm not saying it's any different then or now. I'm just saying that be fair and balanced with what you report now versus then. Your thoughts?
I think that's very true. I mean, remember, the Department of Justice building is the RFK building, and this is, if there was ever a concern for a partisan and somebody that had the president's back, it would have been his brother, RFK.
Well, what
when
is the
JFK
role
was
of an
president.
attorney general? I mean, when you were in that acting role, and of course now Bill Barr's role, obviously when someone gets that job, it's not quite like another cabinet position, because you could find yourself in a position where you are going after or challenging or pursuing something that is contrary to the president's interests. How comfortable should we be in that, or should a president be in that?
Well, you're the chief federal law enforcement officer in the entire country. You lead the Department of Justice, which includes the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, and the U.S. Marshals, in addition to the Bureau of Prisons. So it's a massive organization of 110,000 dedicated individuals. But, you give legal advice, and you are, you includes the Office of Legal Counsel, which is the government's lawyer, the executive branch's lawyer that says what the law is. And, so you are you giving daily legal advice to the executive branch, including the president, telling them what's possible and what's not possible. And, sometimes, is that in contravention? Is there a disagreement? Sure, there's a lot of smart people, both at the White House and at the Department of Justice. But in my experience, we were always able to explain what the law was, and it was followed.
So would Janet Reno challenge her own president, Bill Clinton, about how she was going to handle Waco? In fact, kept him out of the loop. That might be an extreme case, but she challenged the guy who picked her, right?
Yeah, and you have to be prepared, obviously, to do that, and it does not happen often, but at the same time, the Department of Justice is part of the executive branch, and the president has the power. This is one of the things that Eric Holder disagreed with, was Bill Barr's explanation of the unified executive theory at the Federal Society in November, and Eric Holder disagreed with that and said that somehow cabinet secretaries are could be quasi-independent. That's not constitutional law. It's inconsistent with American history. All the executive power is manifest in the President of the United States, and everyone else serves at a derivative nature to that.
All right. You seem to know a lot about the law. Matthew, always good seeing you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.